Welcome to a Legendarium special about Edgar Allan Poe's Strangest story, The Adventures of Hans Pfall. In this episode, we will learn about an Edgar Allan Poe story that sounds like it was written by Jules Verne. Early American writer Edgar Allan Poe is revered today as one of the first men to write in the horror genre. Short stories like The Telltale Heart, The Pit and the Pendulum, and The Cask of Amontillado are revered today as iconic horror stories. Yet Edgar Allan Poe became one of the earliest writers of short stories, the inventor of the modern detective story, and an innovator in the new genre of science fiction. He also became one of the United States' first professional writers and one of its first starving artists. Some of Poe's early science fiction stories include The Conversation of Eros and Charmin, in which two spirits recall the destruction of Earth by a comet. In The Facts of the Case of Monsieur Valdemar, a sick man is mesmerized on the point of death, turning him into an undead zombie. Yet one of Poe's most unusual works is The Unparalleled Adventures of Hans Pfall. Poe published this story in 1835 at the age of 26, only the second of his known published works. Like his first work, Found in a Bottle, it is an adventure story. At the time, vast blank spaces remained on the world map for Europeans, especially in Africa and the Arctic. This made adventure stories into unknown lands, often by balloon, popular staples of literature. However, Hans Pfall did not seek a lost continent or a mysterious island, but the moon. Lunar voyages excited the imaginations of Europeans for centuries. Scientists imagined a range of improbable means to travel to the moon, including a giant spring or a chariot towed by a flock of geese. Poe, for his part, tried to craft a story that described such a journey in scientific detail. It opens in Rotterdam during the year 1735, when an earless, long-nosed dwarf piloted a balloon to within 100 feet of the ground. It dropped a letter to Earth along with 6 bags of sand and then ascends back into space. The mayor of Rotterdam picks up the letter and reads it to the widow of Hans Pfall, a man who vanished 5 years ago. This starts the second part of the story, in which Hans Pfall introduces himself as a Rotterdam bellows mender who prospers for a time, yet he falls on hard times when people learn to mend their own bellows with dirty newspapers, and he finds himself hounded by creditors. The often indebted Poe likely drew on his own experience for this. While considering suicide to escape his plight, Pfall happens across a book on astronomy and hatches a scheme. He persuades his wife to sell his furniture and then pays his creditors. He then entices the greedy men into loaning him more money, promising them vast riches when his scheme is finished. Pfall uses the money to purchase muslin, varnish, rope, and wicker. He then builds a balloon carriage in his basement and a balloon from the dirty newspapers that put Pfall out of business. The night before his launch, Pfall digs holes for cans of cannon powder connected by a fuse. To make a gas lighter than air, Pfall mixes a secret and unnamed metal with acid. Pfall then lures out his greedy creditors, sets off the explosives to launch the balloon, and blasts himself off the face of the earth while also murdering his creditors in the blast. Pfall calculates that he will reach the moon in 161 days by traveling at 60 miles per hour, then an incredible speed. First, he passes through rain clouds and narrowly avoids death by a lightning bolt. When the balloon becomes heavy with moisture, he throws sand ballast overboard. On the way up, Pfall conducts experiments with cats and birds. Sadly, the cats are accidentally lost, as Pfall has risen high enough to make out the world's continents. As the air grows thin, Poe has Pfall ease his breathing by bloodletting, a common and worthless medical process at his time. Pfall even designs an air condenser by sucking air into a vacuum tube connected to a machine within the bag. The air is condensed and then blows into a chamber where Pfall can breathe. As Pfall enters space, he is awoken on his first night by a roar and a blinding light, which turned out to be a shooting star. After getting a breathtaking view of the much closer planets, the moon's gravity starts pulling Pfall downwards. At first, Pfall is fearful, wondering if his balloon stopped working. Yet in time he sees a city built along one of the moon's rivers, and it becomes too warm to sustain the condenser. During the descent, he is forced to dismantle his balloon piece by piece and throw the excess weight overboard to slow down his descent. Yet he still makes a crash landing and soon finds himself surrounded by the dwarfish, earless, and long-nosed people seen at the start of the story. After bidding farewell to Earth, which he can see from the moon, he soon finds that these small moon men have made him their king. He drills them to form an army and sets them to work building roads and digging canals, much as Americans did in their own country during Poe's time. 5 years later, Pfall begins to grow homesick and sends the Moon Man messenger to Earth, offering his scientific knowledge of the moon in exchange for a pardon. While the mayor is agreeable to the proposal, the Moon Man has already flown away and the pardon cannot be offered, much to the relief of Mrs. Pfall, who does not miss her husband in the least. Of course, this flight would not work in real life. Poe did not know that a balloon could not ascend through the vacuum of space, and that Pfall would encounter zero gravity and not enough oxygen to sustain life. Yet it remained the most scientific study of spaceflight until Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, itself published 30 years later and inspired by Poe's short story. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.